So right now there is a special talk about Al Jazeera and Al Arabiya. Of course, I'm expressing my own opinion. They shouldn't really protect me. They should protect themselves. They do have enough money and resources to protect themselves. They basically cover lots of videos of what is covered in detail the situation in Syria. But the television that is protecting Assad, they couldn't show one video that really proves that he fights with bandits or armed forces, and also about the concerns of Islamists coming to power, especially the U.S. or Russia's concerns. The U.S. is having this war against terrorism in Afghanistan. That's how Russia called its war in Chechnya. In this room, no one can tell me the names of two Syrians who fought in these wars. Russia or the United States, don't they have this information available? Or maybe they do have this kind of goal in all Arab countries. And someone can say that they have concerns that amongst the Syrian rebels, there are some Al-Qaeda people. Mr. Lavrov from Russia says they have concerns that Sunnis are being trained, although we know that Sunnis, more than 80% of them are in Syria. If we take a look at these two statements, they serve the single goal. I didn't hear the statement from Mr. Lavrov. I think you are misquoting him. And later, I don't think the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia could say this. I'm sorry. I can show it to you later. Okay. And if we take a look at both of the statements, we can see that they serve the same purpose of basically destroying this whole country. Thank you.
So first you and then you.
Yes, welcome. No. Okay. First you, after that you.
Thank you. I was about to complete a textbook on Arab media, an academic book in English, and luckily I didn't finish it, and we had to add another chapter about the coverage of Arab media of the unfolding events in the Arab world. By and large, I definitely agree with Mr. Salamawi's reflection on the functionality of Arab media, apart from the fact that I wouldn't use the term objectivity. I was desperately trying to find out only one balanced media outlet in Arabic, and I failed to do so. Having said that, perhaps just to clarify, there is Al-Ahram in Arabic and English and probably in other languages, and I know from academic observation that the one in English has got much more relaxed approach and freedom of expression. Moving to Mr. Bakhar there, who interestingly enough portrayed to us a very rosy picture of the media in Israel, and me, myself, who masters Hebrew, as well as had a past as a media practitioner in one Israeli Hebrew newspaper, I can tell you just a few things that Mr. Bacha chose perhaps not to rise to the challenge, as he said. The first one is that Israel runs itself according to the defense emergency regulations since the 40s, which were described by Menachem Begin, the former prime minister, as worse than the Nuremberg laws, which means that Israel, until this very moment, every 6 months or 2 years, the Knesset renews these laws. These laws include censorship. And part of the self-censorship that we never hear about, because very few people know Hebrew, is the very fact that even before the Palestinian catastrophe, the Nakba, and the establishment of the State of Israel, the Israeli editors-in-chief of the Hebrew newspapers established what is called in Hebrew it's called Mo'etzet HaOrchim, or Va'adat HaOrchim, which means the Committee of Editors-in-Chiefs. What does this committee do? It meets every now and again the Prime Minister. They share together some interesting talks over a cup of coffee or brandy, and then they agree not to share any information with the public. So this is actually the kind of newspaper or media, Israeli media, that we have. And until this very moment, Mr. Bakhar, you know very well that Israeli media, as a social agency, have been raising Israeli generations on hatred and racism towards anything that is called Palestinians or Arab or Muslim.
Okay, of course.
Well, you're a bit out of date there. The editors' committee hasn't been in operation for many years, and by the way, the UK has something quite similar. It's called the D-Notice. If you work in the UK, you should know. I'm not saying it was one of the glorious chapters of Israeli media, but that's not been they've not been around for many, many years. You cannot operate a news gathering organization these days as they did in the 50s, 60s, and even 70s. But I think since the start of the 80s, it hasn't been. What was the other point you raised, Makam? Sorry.
It was about the racist content of the Hebrew media and the press in particular. And you know that. You worked in Maariv, which used to be a very right-wing, semi-fascist newspaper.
Well, it's all a question of definition. If you call it semi-fascist, it doesn't make it so. All of us are responsible for stereotyping, I think, anywhere, in any country. I do not read Arabic. I've read some reports about what you can read in Arabic media as well, in terms of caricatures and so on. I don't make an issue of it. I personally don't make an issue of it. But to portray the Israeli media as racist, as inherently racist, promoting racist youth views is a bit much, I think.
После такого обмена репликами, который
After
все-таки
such
несравненно
an
лучше, чем обмен
exchange of
ракетами,
opinions,
согласитесь.
which is much better than the
Можно сделать вывод,
exchange
что,
of
может быть, дискуссия между
rockets.
журналистами о
We
двойных
can come
стандартах
to
это
the
некая
conclusion
альтернатива горячей войне.
that
Пусть лучше
this
будет
discussion of
конфликт
double standard is a good
вербальный,
alternative
чем
to
конфликт материальный.
actual conflict.
Сейчас, Джордж, я дам вам слово, но
George, I
сначала
will
вот
give you the
давно
floor.
просил господин,
Just
да,
a second,
пожалуйста,
but
прошу вас.
yes, you were asking for the opportunity to intervene.
My name is Claude Silhani. I was the foreign editor of United Press International in 2011, on September 11th, 2001, sorry. And the day after the attacks, I decided, just a word about double standards, terrorism. We were not allowed to use the word terrorism in UPI because, as was mentioned, one person's terrorist is the other one's freedom fighter. So we avoided that word until September 11th, when everything changed. On that day, the day after September 12th, I called a gentleman by the name of Bassam Abu Sharif, which some people might recognize the name. He used to be the #2 in the PFLP, Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. He was involved in the hijacking in 1970 of 3 airplanes that were taken to Jordan and blown up. And I asked him what he thought about September 11th, and he screamed at me. He said, "These people are terrorists." And I thought it was quite interesting that a person who had been described by many people around the world as a terrorist turned around and called other people terrorists. And so from that day on, everything changed.
Спасибо.
Thank you.
Замечание, Джордж, да?
George, you wanted to make a comment, right?
Thanks.
Yes.
But in relation to that, the great European intellectual
Peter Ustinov,
Microphone, okay.
the great European intellectual Peter Ustinov, had this definition, that terrorism is the war of the poor and powerless, and war is the terrorism of the rich and powerful. And as a description of this dilemma that we are identifying here, I think that's quite a good one. But the young gentleman from Al Arabiya was concerned about the reputation of the Arab channels. With all respect, Al Arabiya never had any reputation because it's owned by Saudi Arabia, the darkest, least free country on the earth. And so any country which owns a channel, and it's called Saudi Arabia, has no credibility. Al Jazeera did spend billions and has committed journalistic suicide over this last period, precisely on the point that you have raised. Maxim will remember, his professor even better, how the people we now call Al-Qaeda were called freedom fighters, mujahideen, when they were fighting the Red Army and the former Soviet Union, on the principle that my enemy's enemy is my friend. These people were hailed as freedom fighters, given money and weapons, until they, like Frankenstein's monster, broke free of their patrons and those who showered them with praise, and began attacking their patrons and those who showered them with praise. So then they became terrorists. On 9/11, UPI had to acknowledge that everything changed. They were then terrorists, madmen, bloodthirsty savages, until Gaddafi came to be overthrown, when the very same terrorists and bloodthirsty murderers became freedom fighters again, until those very same freedom fighters murdered the American ambassador in Benghazi just a few weeks ago. Now they're terrorists again, except in Syria, where we are giving them money and guns and paeans of praise in the media because my enemy's enemy is my friend. Well, your enemy's enemy isn't always your friend. Sometimes your enemy's enemy is worse than your enemy. And I'm here to tell you that the kind of elements that the Western media is hailing in the Syrian conflict now are exactly the kind of people who flew those airplanes into the Twin Towers on 9/11, are exactly the kind of people who stuck an iron bar in the anus of Gaddafi and killed him in cold blood, even though for the previous years he'd been crawling on his hands and knees to the very Western powers who sent these quote-unquote freedom fighters into Libya in the first place. My point, therefore, Maxim, is this. There is no objectivity. There is no such thing as objectivity. You will describe actors in these conflicts, or even in normal, everyday economic, political clashes within any polity, according to your own perspective. I've just come from Venezuela. The rich people think that Hugo Chavez is stealing their money that belongs from God to them. The poor people, who thankfully are far more numerous, believe that Hugo Chavez is giving them the money of the country that they deserve. There's no objectivity in this. It depends on your belief system, on your value system, which of these two analyses you prefer. Sorry to go on too long.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you very
Я,
much.
кстати, и не считаю, что,
I,
продолжая
frankly
предыдущее
speaking,
выступление
following up
своего
on the
панели,
previous
то есть какая-то
panel
общественность
speech, I
перед
don't
обществом,
believe that there is
какая-то
some
ответственность перед
responsibility
обществом.
to the
Я считал и
society.
считаю, что
I
человек
believe
ответственен
that I
перед
do
Богом.
believe that a person
И
has
что я не знаю, что
responsibility
такое
to
общество,
God, and
общество приходит и
he has to
уходит. Я
report to
родился
God. I
в
don't know
одной
what
стране,
society is.
жил
I
в
was
другой
born in one
в
country,
молодости, а сейчас,
then
по-видимому,
lived
Россия становится
as a
третьей
young
страной
person in
какой-то.
the
Я
other
точно
country.
умру,
Now
я
I
отвечу
live
перед
in
Богом.
Russia, which is
Это, мне
totally
кажется, гораздо
different
более
from where I
важная
was born. But
мера
I will
ответственности, в том числе
die,
для
and
журналистов.
when I die,
Пожалуйста, прошу
the
вас.
responsibility I have is to God. That's, I think, is more important for a journalist.
I think we're expecting too much when we are expecting freedom of press and expecting that we will hear independent views. When the ownership of the press, ownership of the media is in the hands of corporate rich guys, they will never, go back on their own interest. When Murdoch brings in Margaret Thatcher, when he brings in Tony Blair, when he brings in Gordon Brown, these are the people that will never tell you the truth. And basically, all the world, the developed world, press, has gone to the ownership of the big corporation. With the World Trade Organization, the same corporation have spread all over the world, and the media is being controlled by them. How do we expect? This is, I think, really childish. to, expect these companies to give you independent reports. Look at the election right now in U.S. It's basically billions and billions of dollars going to these media to promote one side or another side. How can we hear the truth if some big newspaper or some big TV channel gets $200 million at the end of the day for 6 months? How can he go against the person that has paid, or the people around that person that has paid $200 million? How can they go against them and tell you about the truth is going on? No, we really have to be a little bit more realistic about this thing. This is really too fancy. These are really fancy talks about media. It's finished. Media is finished. Sorry.
Ну вот прямо пришли и расставили всю посуду на
You
полке.
came and put everything into the right places. This dependence on society and on money were wrapping up. They were summarizing an hour and a half of theoretical, but in fact, really practical, relevant talk. It's no longer acceptable to people. We understand that there are big shots, Rupert Murdochs, who own the information picture of the world. The paradox is that the human development and individual evolution results in independence of people. New forms of cooperation emerge, new forms of creation of human societies and communities. I think it's not that unconditional, as you said. For example, I'm not a fan of Facebook myself, or some other networks, but we really see examples when people without money, but on the condition that there are free providers willing to work with their projects, those people gain huge results, gaining the audiences of millions of people without investing any resources other than their private life and their private position. I think it actually changes the world. We are wrapping up the discussion. I would like to ask each panelist to, within 1 minute, each of you will have 1 minute to say your resume, like a very brief wrap-up of several lines, brief wrap-up of our discussion. Let's start there with you.
Well, I just want to draw the attention to the fact that although many people think, and it has been said tonight, that the internet and Facebook and Twitter and all that is a way of achieving objectivity and all sorts of opinions are being expressed, I think the opposite is true. I think there are also a lot of lies on the internet. There's also a lot of information, but there is also a lot of misinformation and disinformation, and all sorts of preposterous things are being said. And the written word still has more sanctity than the internet. But I have to say that at least in Egypt, the prospects of the written press are not very good with the advent of the Muslim Brotherhood and the actions they have taken as regards the press during the past few months.
Спасибо. Михаил.
Thank you. We have to look at truth. Never. Not a single mass media, whether printed or internet-based mass media, will never cover full truth. Never Western mass media will write that the Chechen war started after the genocide of Russian population in Chechen Republic. They will never write it. We can only expect that there will be no monopoly of power in the world if there are different centers of power, multipolarity will give pluralism of mass media. If there is a monopoly for power, in that case, we will have to acknowledge that truth will be controlled by a narrow group of people in their interests. Thank you. Mr. Amir Ahmadi.
Thank you. 2 points. One, a reaction to this statement that why Iran doesn't have the right to have bomb. Because Iran is within the NPT. If Iran wants to have the bomb, it has to exit NPT tomorrow. That's number one. You cannot have it both ways. You cannot be within NPT and build bomb, just like Israelis did, or the Pakistanis or Indians. If you wanted to build bomb, go out.
Can you go out of the NPT?
Just simply saying you can't have it both ways. Iran cannot say